The city was alive that afternoon. Cars rushing by, vendors shouting out their specials, and the smell of roasted corn drifting through the air. Near a small food cart stood a man in a gray hoodie, jeans, and worn-out sneakers. He kept his cap low and his posture relaxed, waiting quietly for his order. That man was Manny Pacquiao, a living legend, though no one there seemed to notice. For once, he wasn't surrounded by cameras, security, or fans. Just peace, simplicity, and a few minutes to enjoy his favorite street snack, until a patrol car rolled up. The black and white cruiser slowed to a crawl, then stopped right beside the food cart. Two officers stepped out, Officer Foster and Officer Reed. They exchanged glances, smirking as they eyed the man by the cart. "Hey, you," Foster called out. "You got a minute?" Manny turned, polite as ever. "Yes, officer." "Something wrong?" Reed tilted his head. "We've had a few complaints about suspicious activity around here. You look kinda out of place." The words were sharp. People nearby paused mid-conversation. Manny blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm just getting food, sir." Foster took a step closer, his hand resting lazily on his belt. "Got ID on you?" "Yes," Manny said quietly. "In my wallet." "Let's see it," the officer ordered, his tone more command than request. Manny handed over his ID calmly. Foster snatched it, glancing at the name. He chuckled. "Manny Pacquiao? You expect me to believe that?" Reed laughed under his breath. "Yeah, sure, buddy. And I'm the heavyweight champ." The crowd began to notice now. People turned their heads, whispering. A few phones came up, recording quietly. Manny stayed silent. No anger, no defensiveness, just patience. Years in the ring had taught him that real strength wasn't about who swung first. But the officers didn't stop. "You know," Reed said mockingly, "you could have picked a better fake name. At least make it believable." The smirk on his face was enough to make even bystanders uncomfortable. And then Manny slowly raised his eyes. Calm, steady, unshaken. What Manny said next froze the officers where they stood. Officer Foster turned Manny's ID over in his hand like it was a fake coin. "Manny Pacquiao," he repeated, mocking every syllable. "You really went all in with that one, huh? Thought that name would scare us or something?" Manny said nothing. He simply met the officer's stare with quiet patience. Reed grinned and leaned in. "Come on, man. What are you really doing here? Selling stuff under the table? Loitering? You hiding something in that bag?" "It's just food," Manny replied softly. Nothing more, but they weren't listening. The teasing tone became sharper, more public. Foster glanced around at the small circle of onlookers forming by the cart. "People around here gotta learn the rules," he said loudly. "If we ask questions, you answer quick. No attitude." A few people murmured disapproval. A teenager whispered, "Why are they bothering him? He didn't do anything." Manny heard it, but his focus stayed steady. "Officer," he said, "I respect your duty, but I've done nothing wrong. Please just check the ID." Foster scoffed. "You think I can't tell when someone's lying?" He pulled out his radio, pretending to call for backup. "Possible ID fraud suspect named Manny Pacquiao," he said into the mic. "Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous." Laughter rippled among a few bystanders, but most of them looked uncomfortable now. The tension was real, palpable. Reed moved closer, folding his arms. "You look nervous," he said, eyeing Manny's calm posture. "Why's that?" "I'm not nervous," Manny replied. "Just disappointed." "Disappointed?" Foster raised an eyebrow. "In what?" "In how quickly people judge others," Manny said quietly. That line caught a few people off guard. A woman holding her phone lowered it slightly, surprised by how calm his voice was. Reed tried to shake it off. "Save the philosophy, man. You're not on some talk show." Foster took a small step forward, invading Manny's personal space. "Let's see what's in your pockets." Manny didn't move. "There's nothing illegal on me, sir. Just my wallet and phone." "Then empty them," Foster barked. The crowd stirred. Someone shouted, "He already gave you his ID." Another voice followed, "Leave him alone." The officers ignored the noise. Foster gestured toward the bench beside the cart. "Sit down." Manny stayed on his feet. His stance was still relaxed, but his presence carried weight. "No, sir," he said, calm yet firm. "I haven't broken any law. You have no reason to detain me." That quiet resistance irritated Foster more than anger ever could. "Oh, we'll see about that," he said, his tone turning cold. Reed shifted, lowering his hand near his belt as if to warn Manny. "You sure you want to play tough guy?" Manny didn't flinch. "I don't need to play tough," he answered. "I know who I am." A hush fell. Cameras zoomed in. People sensed that something important was about to happen. Foster frowned. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Manny tilted his head slightly, eyes steady. "Someone who's faced harder fights than this, but always with respect." The remark landed like a quiet punch. It wasn't loud, but it hit deep. Reed smirked, trying to keep his composure. "You got a smart mouth for a small guy." Manny gave the faintest smile. "Sometimes small men can teach big lessons." The crowd murmured again, louder this time. A few claps broke through the tension. Foster's face flushed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd mistaken for an ordinary bystander. He snapped, "You better watch your tone. You don't want to spend the night in a cell." "I've spent nights training for battles tougher than any cell," Manny replied evenly. "I can handle discomfort. But injustice." He paused. "That's harder to ignore." The crowd erupted with quiet agreement. One man near the back shouted, "He's right!" Phones were everywhere now, lenses catching every movement, every word. Foster realized the scene had spiraled beyond control. His smirk faded, replaced by an uneasy tension in his jaw. Reed whispered, "Maybe we should just..." But Foster cut him off, still trying to save face. "No, he wants to act like a celebrity? Let's see how brave he is at the station." That was the moment Manny took a slow step forward. Not threatening, just composed. His gaze was steady, his voice low but commanding. "Officer," he said, "I tried to stay respectful, but you crossed a line." The crowd leaned in, Foster stiffened. "What line?" "The line between authority and arrogance," Manny replied. "You wear a badge to protect, not to humiliate." A silence swept the scene, thick and electric. The same people who had been whispering now watched in awe. Manny's posture never changed. His tone was still calm, but the strength behind it was undeniable. And then he said the words that would soon travel across every social feed. "Do you know who I am?" It wasn't shouted, it was delivered like a truth long ignored. Foster blinked, confused for the first time. Who are you?" The crowd's anticipation grew. A few gasped softly, realizing what was coming. Manny simply looked him in the eye and said, "I'm someone you should have treated with respect from the start. No anger. No ego, just conviction." Phones caught the moment. The internet would soon explode. But right there in that instant, all that mattered was the quiet reversal of power. The calm before revelation. Have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected by authority? Comment yes if you believe dignity shouldn't depend on appearance, and tell us where you're watching from. For a few long seconds, the park fell silent. Only the wind moved, rustling through the trees and carrying the faint sound of traffic from a distance. Officer Foster blinked, his earlier smirk gone. The confidence in his posture started to waver, replaced by confusion and unease. "Respect?" he muttered, trying to recover his tone. "You think you can just talk to an officer like that?" Manny didn't raise his voice. "I don't talk to uniforms," he said calmly. "I talk to people, but not everyone remembers how to listen." The crowd murmured again. Someone shouted, "He's right!" Another voice added, "You don't treat people like that." Phones were up everywhere now, dozens of lenses capturing every second. The once casual park had turned into a stage of accountability. Officer Reed shifted awkwardly. "All right, that's enough," he said, glancing at the crowd. "Let's just keep this civil." But Foster wasn't backing down. His pride burned hotter than reason. He pointed at Manny's chest. "You think you can stand there and lecture me? Who do you think you are?" Manny looked down at the finger pressed near his chest, then back up at Foster. He didn't flinch, didn't move. His calmness was disarming. "You asked who I am," he said slowly. "I'm someone who's fought for respect his entire life, inside and outside the ring." Foster scoffed, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "What ring?" "The boxing ring," a man from the crowd said loudly. "That's Manny Pacquiao." At first, only a few people reacted. Then recognition spread like a spark in dry grass. "Wait, what? No way. Bro, that is him." A teenager zoomed in with his phone camera, showing Manny's face clearly. "It's Pacquiao!" he yelled. "The champ, look!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The tension flipped instantly. People who had been hesitant now stepped forward, protective, energized. Foster's expression cracked. "You're kidding me," he muttered, looking at the ID again. His face went pale. The name suddenly wasn't a joke anymore. Reed glanced at his partner, nervous. Man, that's really him. You messed up. But Manny didn't gloat. He didn't move a muscle. He stood with quiet grace, the same discipline that had carried him through years of world championship bouts. I told you, Manny said softly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I came for food. You brought the fight. The crowd started to clap, slowly at first, then louder. People shouted words of encouragement. We love you, Manny. You didn't deserve that. Tell them what respect means. Foster took a step back, his hand no longer near his holster. His authority was melting in real time. He tried to regain control. Look, Mr. Pacquiao, sir, I didn't realize. Manny interrupted, still composed. You didn't realize because you didn't care to look. You saw what you wanted to see. That sentence cut deeper than any punch. The officer's mouth opened, but no words came out. Reed finally spoke, his tone low. We were just doing our job. Your job, Manny replied, is to protect, not to provoke. That line hit the crowd hard. Applause erupted again. Dozens of cameras caught the moment from every angle. Foster's pride was in shambles. He looked around helplessly, seeing the sea of phones pointed at him. The reality of what this moment meant began to sink in. Manny took a step back, not to retreat but to give the officers space to think. You wear power on your chest, he said, nodding at the badge. But power means nothing without humility. Silence again. You could almost hear the officers breathing. Reed cleared his throat. Mr. Pacquiao, we didn't mean any harm. Manny gave a faint smile, not of forgiveness but understanding. Intentions matter less than actions, officer. The crowd fell quiet again, hanging on every word. Foster looked down, his earlier arrogance now replaced by visible shame. He stammered, Sir, maybe we can just forget this happened. Manny nodded slightly. I can forget your words, but others might not forget your example. That line landed like a thunderclap. Someone shouted from the crowd, You tell him, Manny! Another man added, This is why we record everything. The officers were now surrounded not by hostility but by truth. They had mocked a man they didn't recognize, only to be schooled by his composure. Foster exhaled heavily, glancing at the cameras. He knew his career might never be the same after this video went viral. Manny adjusted his cap, ready to leave. Next time, he said, look at a man's character before you judge his clothes. Then he turned and started to walk away. The crowd parted for him like water. Applause followed every step. Foster called out weakly, Mr. Pacquiao, wait, please. But Manny didn't stop. He simply raised a hand slightly and said without turning, Just remember, respect is free. It costs you nothing, but it defines who you are. The applause swelled louder. People cheered, chanting his name. Manny, 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 and the officers? They stood frozen, faces flushed, pride shattered, surrounded by witnesses who had just seen what true strength looked like. The crowd's applause still echoed through the park as Manny began walking away, his steps steady and unhurried. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any argument. Behind him, officers Foster and Reed stood rooted in place, their faces pale and their composure gone. What began as casual teasing had turned into a public lesson neither of them would forget. People surrounded the officers now, not aggressively, but with the quiet fury of witnesses who'd just seen injustice exposed. A teenage boy near the front, still recording on his phone, whispered to his friend, I can't believe that was really Manny Pacquiao. The dude's a legend. His friend nodded, eyes wide, and they treated him like some nobody. That's crazy. The whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. That's Pacquiao, right? Yeah, man. The boxer. The senator from the Philippines. Bro, those cops messed up big time. Reed wiped his forehead, glancing around nervously. This is getting out of hand, man. We should just walk away. Foster clenched his jaw. We can't, it'll look like we're running. Running? Reed muttered. We already look like fools. The phones were everywhere now, at least 20 different angles recording their embarrassment. Someone even went live on social media. Comments started pouring in instantly. No way, that's Manny. These cops are done. The champ handled that better than anyone could. Meanwhile, Manny stopped a few feet away and turned slightly, not to confront them, but to glance at the food cart owner, who had been frozen the whole time. Thank you for waiting, Manny said softly. Can I get that corn now? The vendor nodded rapidly. handing him the wrapped cob with trembling hands. "Of course, sir, no charge. It's an honor." Manny smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves to earn their keep. I'll pay." He handed over a few bills and gave a small bow before turning back toward the path. That simple act, his calm, his humility, made the crowd admire him even more. Someone shouted, "You're a real one, champ." Another yelled, "That's how a man handles disrespect with class." As Manny walked away, a group of young men clapped loudly. The energy shifted completely. What had begun as mockery had become reverence. But the officers weren't done facing consequences. From the corner of the street, a new police vehicle approached slowly. The crowd parted instinctively. The car door opened and a tall, older officer stepped out, his uniform crisp, his demeanor calm but commanding. His name tag read Captain Ruiz. "What's going on here?" Ruiz asked, his voice steady but serious. Foster straightened immediately. "Just, routine questioning, sir. Situation's under control." "Routine questioning?" Ruiz repeated, looking around at the sea of cell phones pointed in their direction. "It doesn't look that way." One of the bystanders spoke up. "They were harassing Manny Pacquiao for no reason." Ruiz's brows furrowed. "Who? Manny Pacquiao?" A dozen voices answered at once. Ruiz's head snapped toward the direction Manny had gone. He saw the man in the gray hoodie walking away, calm as ever, the crowd parting respectfully around him. Recognition flashed instantly in the captain's eyes. "Oh my God," he breathed. "That is Manny Pacquiao." He turned back to his officers, his tone sharp now. "You two stopped him? What were you thinking?" Reed swallowed hard. We didn't recognize him, sir." Thought he was what?" Ruiz cut in. "A criminal? Because of how he looked?" Foster tried to defend himself. "Sir, we were just following procedure." "No!" Ruiz interrupted again, his voice cutting like steel. "You weren't following procedure. You were following your prejudice." The crowd roared in agreement. Phones caught every second. Ruiz took a few steps forward, raising his hand slightly to calm everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize on behalf of the department. Mr. Pacquiao deserves nothing but respect." Manny stopped when he heard his name again. Slowly, he turned back and began walking toward them, not angry but composed. The crowd fell into a hush as he approached. Ruiz met him halfway and extended a hand. "Mr. Pacquiao, I'm deeply sorry for what you just experienced. I assure you this does not reflect our department's values." Manny shook his hand gently. "Captain, I understand mistakes happen. But this," he looked toward Foster and Reed, "was not a mistake. It was an attitude." The crowd murmured again, impressed by the quiet wisdom in his words. Ruiz nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right, sir. And I will make sure this attitude is corrected." Manny studied the two officers. They couldn't meet his eyes. Reed looked down. Foster's face was red with shame. "Officers," Manny said, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. What you did, many others experience daily without cameras around. Remember that." Foster nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, sir," Reed mumbled. "We're sorry, Mr. Pacquiao." Manny gave a small nod. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the people you misjudged tomorrow." The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't hostile. It was heavy with realization. Ruiz stepped forward again. "Mr. Pacquiao, thank you for your grace. We'll handle this internally." Manny gave a small smile. "Good. Because respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. It should depend on who you are." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time, cheering for the quiet hero who had turned humiliation into humility. Foster looked at the ground, his lips pressed tight. He'd mocked a man he didn't know, and that ignorance had just gone viral. Manny gave Ruiz one last nod, adjusted his cap, and began walking away again. The setting sun cast a golden light behind him, almost cinematic in its timing. Every phone followed him as he disappeared down the park path, his steps unhurried, his dignity untouched. That night, every video, every clip, every quote from that encounter would spread across the world. But in that moment, standing before the humbled officers and the stunned crowd, Manny Pacquiao didn't need cameras or headlines to prove his point. He'd already won, without throwing a single punch. The air was thick with silence. After Captain Ruiz's apology, the crowd expected Manny to leave, but he didn't. He stood there, quiet, composed, the calm eye of a storm that had shaken everyone in sight. Foster and Reed shifted uncomfortably, their earlier arrogance completely gone. They were now two men stripped of pride, surrounded by witnesses and their own regret. Manny looked at them, not with anger, but with something far heavier, disappointment. He spoke softly, his words deliberate and steady. "Do you know what hurts more than insults?" The officers didn't respond. The crowd leaned in closer, recording, listening. "It's when people with power forget they're meant to serve," Manny continued. "Not to intimidate, not to humiliate," the crowd murmured in agreement. A woman near the front nodded and whispered amen to that. Foster lowered his eyes. The realization of what he'd done was written all over his face. Manny stepped closer, not threateningly, but with presence. Every movement he made carried the quiet authority of a man who'd fought battles both in the ring and in life. "I come from a place where people struggle every day," he said, "where respect is often the only thing a man has left. When someone takes that away without reason, it leaves scars deeper than any wound." Reed's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. Manny's voice grew firmer. "You judged me because of how I looked. Because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs here. You looked at me and saw suspicion, not a human being." He paused. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the sound of cars in the distance seemed to fade away. "That," Manny said, pointing gently toward them, "is the real problem, not just with you, but with the world." He let the words hang there for a moment. "You wear badges," he continued, "and those badges mean responsibility. But when that responsibility turns into ego, the line between justice and abuse disappears." Ruiz looked down, visibly moved by the truth of the statement. Manny's tone softened again, his eyes warm but unwavering. "I don't need an apology," he said. "What I want is awareness. The next time you stop someone, remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be wrong. Because everyone you meet has a story, you just don't know it yet." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Someone said, "Preach, champ." Another added, "That's real talk." Foster finally raised his head. His voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Pacquiao, you're right. I let my attitude get ahead of my duty. I'm sorry." Manny nodded once, slow and respectful. "Acknowledgement is the first step." He turned to Reed. "And you?" Reed swallowed hard. "I followed along when I should have stopped it." "That's on me," Manny sighed quietly. "We all follow sometimes. The question is, do we follow what's right or what's easy?" The entire park seemed to hold its breath. Then Manny straightened his posture and looked out toward the bystanders. "To everyone here, what happened today isn't about fame. It's about respect. Because if you only respect people when they're known, that's not respect. It's fear disguised as manners." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder than before. Many were nodding. Some were even wiping away tears. It was more than a viral moment now, it was a public awakening. Manny raised his hand slightly, asking for quiet again. "When I was young," he said, "I learned to fight. Not to hurt others, but to stand up for myself. But life has taught me something more valuable. True strength is staying calm when others lose theirs." He looked directly at Foster. "I didn't come here to embarrass you, officer. You did that to yourself. But I hope you take this moment and use it to become better. Because one day the man you stop might not be famous, but his dignity should still matter." Those words hit deep. Foster's shoulders sagged. He nodded, unable to hide the emotion on his face. Ruiz stepped forward, trying to diffuse the weight in the air. "Mr. Pacquiao, thank you. You didn't have to speak with such grace, but you did. You reminded us all what leadership looks like." Manny smiled faintly. "Leadership isn't about control. It's about example." He glanced back at the crowd, his voice steady. "You all recorded this, and that's fine. But don't just post it for views. Post it for awareness. Let people see that respect isn't earned by status, it's earned by behavior." Applause thundered again. Some people chanted his name softly. "Manny, Manny." Manny nodded humbly, almost shy about the attention. "Thank you," he said. "But remember, today isn't about me. It's about what's right." He turned to Ruiz one last time. "Captain, thank you for handling this properly." Ruiz saluted lightly. "And thank you for reminding us what integrity looks like, sir." Manny adjusted his cap, preparing to leave again. "Take care, officers," he said quietly. "And next time you see someone who looks different, start with kindness. It might surprise you who you're talking to." The crowd roared with approval. People clapped, whistled, shouted words of support. As Manny walked away, a teenager near the front turned to his phone camera and said, "That right there is how you handle hate, with dignity." Others echoed him. The park buzzed with energy, not of anger but of inspiration. Foster watched Manny disappear into the sunset-lit path, his figure outlined by the fading gold light. He muttered under his breath. He didn't even raise his voice, and still made us feel small, Reed sighed. That's what real power looks like. Captain Ruiz looked at both of them and said quietly, "Remember this moment, gentlemen. Because this is the kind of respect you can't demand. You earn it." And as the last of the crowd began to disperse, someone shouted one final message that summed up the day better than any headline ever could. Real champions fight with their heart, not their fists. Manny Pacquiao never looked back. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered, and the world was about to hear it. The videos hit the internet before Manny even made it home. Within minutes, clips of the encounter were everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. Every angle, every second, every word he'd spoken echoed across millions of screens. The captions were all variations of the same shock. Cops mocked a stranger. Turns out he was Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao handles police harassment with dignity. Respect everyone. You never know who you're talking to. By nightfall, the story had already gone viral. The park incident wasn't just a local embarrassment. It had become an international headline. News anchors replayed the footage over and over. Analysts debated it. Comment sections exploded with reactions. He didn't even get angry. That's class. Power isn't in shouting, it's in calmness. Those cops should be suspended. This is why prejudice needs to end now. Even people who weren't boxing fans recognized greatness when they saw it. Manny's calm, controlled response had struck a nerve around the world. But inside the police precinct, things were anything but calm. Captain Ruiz sat in his office with a grim expression. The department's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters were waiting outside. The mayor had called twice, the chief once. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paused video of Foster and Reed's faces as they realized who they had insulted. The freeze frame said it all, shock, regret, and humiliation all at once. He sighed heavily. "Gentlemen," he said, motioning for the two officers to sit. Foster lowered himself slowly into the chair, his head down. Reed fidgeted, unable to meet the captain's eyes. "You both understand the gravity of what happened today, right?" Ruiz began. "Yes, sir," Foster said quietly. "This department is under fire because of your behavior. The world is calling this an example of racial profiling and abuse of authority." Ruiz's tone was firm but not cruel, and honestly, they're not wrong. Reed exhaled shakily. "We didn't mean to. Intention doesn't erase impact," Ruiz cut him off. "You both embarrassed this uniform and yourselves." The silence was heavy. Then Ruiz added, "Do you know what's worse? He could have destroyed you. That man had every right to lash out, to humiliate you publicly, to demand your jobs. But he didn't." Foster nodded slowly. "He showed more restraint than we did." Ruiz leaned forward. "Exactly. He showed you what strength looks like. You thought power meant control. He showed you that real power is dignity." Both officers stayed quiet. There was nothing they could say. A knock came at the door. The chief of police entered, flanked by two city officials. Everyone in the room stood immediately. "Sit," the chief said briskly. "We're not here to make a scene." He turned to Ruiz. "I saw the footage. The situation is unacceptable. I've already issued a statement condemning their actions." He looked at Foster and Reed. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation." Reed's eyes widened. "Chief, don't," the chief said sharply. "You humiliated this department and you did it on camera. Be grateful that the man you disrespected has more mercy than most." Both officers nodded, defeated. After they left, the chief turned to Ruiz. "You handled it well, Captain. But this story's not dying down anytime soon," Ruiz sighed. "I know. Manny Pacquiao didn't just teach them a lesson. He reminded the world what character looks like." Meanwhile, across town, Manny sat in his quiet living room. His phone buzzed constantly. Calls, messages, social media notifications. Friends, reporters, politicians, athletes all reaching out to praise him. But he wasn't smiling. He just watched the footage once more, shaking his head slowly. He hadn't meant for it to become a spectacle. To him, it was never about revenge. It was about awareness. An interviewer from a major news network finally reached him by phone. "Mr. Pacquiao, would you like to make a statement about what happened today?" Manny paused for a long moment before replying, "Yes, but not about me." When the interview aired that night, his message was simple, but powerful. No one should be judged by appearance. Respect is not something you give only to the famous. It's something you give to everyone. Because true respect shows who you are, not who they are. Those words went viral instantly. Hashtags exploded across the internet. "I respect everyone." Manny Pacquiao, "Guy's real power is calm." People began sharing their own stories of discrimination, of unfair treatment, of moments when dignity won over anger. The incident had become a movement. Celebrities weighed in. Other athletes shared Manny's quote. Even law enforcement leaders around the world reposted the video as a teaching example. The next morning, international news outlets ran headlines like, "Pacquiao's dignified silence teaches a lesson to the world. From the ring to real life, the champ still fights the right battles." In the following days, the police department officially issued a public apology. At a press conference, Captain Ruiz stood beside Manny Pacquiao, who had agreed to meet not for revenge, but for resolution. Dozens of cameras flashed as they faced the reporters. Ruiz took the microphone first. "What happened was wrong," he said plainly. Mr. Pacquiao showed more grace than anyone had the right to expect. "We're here today not to save face, but to admit failure and to promise change." Then he turned to Manny. "Sir, thank you for reminding us that respect must never be conditional." Manny stepped forward slowly, adjusting the mic. He spoke softly, but the room was silent. "I appreciate the apology," he began, "but this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who doesn't have a camera when it happens to them. It's about the quiet people who walk away hurt and unheard." He looked out at the sea of reporters. "If this moment teaches anything, let it be this. Kindness is free, but disrespect can cost everything." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras clicked. News anchors whispered live updates. Foster and Reed, standing in the back of the room, looked down, tears in their eyes. Manny noticed them but didn't call them out. He simply gave a small nod in their direction, a silent gesture of forgiveness, and in that single, subtle motion, the world saw what leadership truly meant. As the press conference ended, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Pacquiao, do you think those officers should lose their badges?" Manny turned, gave a faint smile, and said, "I think they've already lost something more valuable, their pride. What they do next will decide if they ever earn it back." That line became the quote of the day. It replayed across news channels, shared millions of times online. Manny didn't seek punishment. He sought growth. He didn't demand apologies. He inspired reflection, and in doing so, he proved once again that true champions don't need a ring to fight. They just need courage, humility, and the will to stand for what's right. Do you think the cops deserve to lose their badges after what happened? Comment yes or no below and tell us why. Let's hear your thoughts from every corner of the world. By sunrise, the world already knew. The video had crossed oceans overnight, reposted by millions, translated into a dozen languages and analyzed by morning talk shows across continents. Headlines screamed across digital screens. Pacquiao turns humiliation into humanity. The champ who fought with grace. Respect has no weight class. Clips of Manny's calm voice. Respect isn't about who they are. It's about who you are. Played everywhere. From news channels in Manila to coffee shop TVs in New York, to phone screens in London subways. For a moment, the whole world seemed united in one idea, that dignity mattered. Even those who didn't know boxing now knew the man behind the gloves. At a cafe in Los Angeles, two men watched the clip silently on a phone. "Bro," one said, shaking his head, "that's Pacquiao?" The dude didn't even flex his fame, just stood there calm. "That's next level respect." The other nodded. "Yeah, real power doesn't yell. It just is." Across the ocean, in a small town in the Philippines, families gathered around their TVs watching the local news replay the story. Elderly neighbors nodded with pride. Kids pointed at the screen wide-eyed. "That's our Manny," one old man said proudly. "He may have left the ring, but he never stopped being a champion." Meanwhile, the police department involved in the incident was under heavy scrutiny. The internal review gained public attention. New training on bias and respect was mandated immediately. For the first time in years, people began talking not just about police reform, but about human reform. How everyone, no matter their position, needed to look at how they treated others. Captain Ruiz addressed the press once again. This wasn't just an incident, he said. It was a mirror. And we all saw something we didn't like. Now we change it. The two officers involved issued public apologies on video. Foster said, "We disrespected a man we should have honored. But the truth is, we didn't disrespect him because he's Manny Pacquiao. We disrespected him because we forgot what respect means." We're learning that now. Though the internet remained divided on whether they deserved forgiveness, many praised Manny's restraint. His choice to correct without condemning had turned an ugly scene into a teachable moment. Manny, however, stayed quiet through the noise. He didn't tweet. He didn't post videos. He let the world do the talking while he reflected privately. Days later, he finally appeared in a short video on his social media accounts. No flashy intro, no background music, just him sitting in a simple white shirt, looking directly into the camera. He began softly, "I didn't plan to go viral. I only planned to be calm." He smiled slightly, then continued, "What happened to me happens to others every day. The only difference is that most people don't have millions watching. That's why I'm speaking now." He leaned closer to the camera. "Don't let fame or appearance decide how you treat someone. The stranger you meet today could be a champion, a worker, or a father just trying to get by. But every single one deserves the same respect." Then he paused, his eyes sincere, his tone humble. "I forgive the officers, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means hoping that next time, they remember humanity before authority." His voice softened even more. "To those who supported me, thank you. But don't fight hate with hate. Fight it with awareness, with kindness, with truth." The video lasted only 3 minutes, yet within hours it broke viewership records. Millions commented. Thousands shared it with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." A real fighter doesn't just win matches, he wins hearts. Influencers quoted him. Politicians referenced him. Schools even began showing the video in ethics and character education classes. Even one of the world's largest law enforcement organizations cited the incident as a training example of restraint and dignity under pressure. In less than a week, the event had transcended scandal. It had become a message, a cultural reset. Later, when Manny was asked in an exclusive interview whether he ever regretted revealing who he was, he smiled faintly and said, "No, I didn't say it to show pride. I said it to show truth. Sometimes people need to see who they're talking to. Not to feel small, but to realize that no one should be treated smaller." The interviewer nodded quietly. "You've fought many battles, sir. Was this one different?" Manny chuckled. "Very. Because in the ring, your opponent wants to beat you. Out there," he gestured to the world, "people just forget to see you." The studio fell silent. Then he added softly, "I'm not fighting for belts anymore. I'm fighting for respect." That line would become the title of dozens of articles. Manny Pacquiao, "I'm not fighting for belts anymore. I'm fighting for respect." In the days that followed, Manny received countless messages from around the globe. From a student in Brazil, "You taught me patience when I wanted to shout." From a teacher in Canada, "Your calm changed how I talk to my students." From a taxi driver in South Africa, "I used to think being quiet was weak. Now I know it's strong." He read them all quietly, one by one, smiling at the thought that something born out of confrontation had turned into connection. The noise eventually faded, as all viral things do, but the impact remained. Police academies began referencing the Pacquiao incident as a model for emotional control. Motivational speakers quoted his lines. Social campaigns used his image to promote equality. And though Manny returned to his simple daily life soon after, people still remembered him, not as the boxer who once dominated the ring, but as the man who stood unshaken when others tried to diminish him. Weeks later, a journalist asked him one last question at a charity event. "Mr. Pacquiao, if you could summarize what you learned from all this in one sentence, what would it be?" Manny thought for a moment, then smiled warmly. "Respect costs nothing," he said, "but losing it can cost your soul." The crowd erupted in applause, and with that he walked off stage, waving gently, still humble, still composed, still the same champion who had proven that real greatness doesn't need gloves, only grace. If you believe in respect and equality, type respect in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Let's show the world that kindness has no borders.